Most people can't imagine what the world would be like without the Amazon rainforest. And having an ocean without coral reefs is much like having an Amazon river without the rainforest. People take for granted coral reefs. Most people don't even acknowledge their existence when they think of the ocean, and yet everybody plays a huge effect on them every day. Coral reefs are single-handedly the most important aspect of all of the world's waters and their ecosystems. But even with such huge importance, they are incredibly fragile. My love for everything about the ocean started when I lived in Guam, and I did a lot of scuba diving in Guam. And without the coral reefs, I don't think my love for the ocean would have really flourished. When I went diving, I felt completely alienated from the rest of the world. It was like I was in a whole nother place. Coral reefs aren't influenced only by the immediate things that humans and tourists do to them when they visit them. They are affected by almost everything that humans do in their daily routines, and cutting back on certain activities can greatly help the ocean's rainforests from disappearing. So to start off, I'd like to explain what coral is. A fun way to look at coral is to think of it as a community. Instead of people, you have little polyps that are no bigger than a couple millimeters, and each one secreting a calcium carbonate skeleton for a home. After you accumulate thousands of polyps coexisting in formations, this determines the species. Fewer than 1,000 of these coral exist in the world. With really only two categories of families, soft coral is one of them. Like the name implies, they tend to be softer and they look like underwater fans or branches. Some examples of these would be branch coral or fan coral or black corals. It uses polyps to feed, and these extend from the rind, which is wrapped around a harder calcium core. The other form of coral is called hard coral, and it takes the form of more like rock formations, or sometimes even flowers and bladed shape extrusions. Brain coral, plate coral, and blade coral, these are all examples of these. They do not have the soft rind, so they're not as flexible as the soft coral. However, they do use polyps to feed just like every other coral. Most corals use polyps to feed on small particles and use photosynthesis. But there are corals that use a nematocyst, which is like a harpoon to feed on smaller fish. Some of the larger coral reefs, which are the Red Sea coral reef, the Red Bank coral reef, the Mesoamerican barrier reef, the Florida reef, the New Caledonia reef, and of course the largest Great Barrier Reef. And those are to just name a few. All of the world's coral reefs put together only make up for about 0.5% of the ocean's floor, and yet more than 90% of the ocean's wildlife all live in them. So why are coral reefs in danger? Even though coral reefs are made of a durable calcium carbonate, these polyps are extremely fragile and are harmed by the smallest things. For example, hard corals only grow in water that is 18 to 29 degrees Celsius, and the salinity of the water has to be 32 parts per liter to 42 parts per liter. This is very picky, being that the average ocean temperature is only 17 degrees Celsius, and the slightest change to temperature around a coral reef can cause the zooxanthellae, which is vital to photosynthesis, to leave the coral in what is known as coral bleaching. Not to feel like a broken record, but one of the biggest problems to coral reefs is global warming. This is because of the rising tides and the average temperature increase. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are causing the ocean's average temperature to rise, and this is greatly harming coral. The warmer climate is also causing much of the polar ice to melt, causing the salinity content to lower. In 1998, 16% of the world's coral reefs died due to global warming and increased water temperature. Another tough war on coral is the fight against the direct human contact. Overfishing has a huge impact on coral reefs by eliminating key predators such as the parrotfish, the shark, and the grouper. This fishing can cause invasive species such as the starfish and certain types of algae and seagrass that feed on coral to overrun the reef without being kept in check. This is happening in the Caribbean reef where algae and the seagrass is overwhelming coral reef, killing 60% since 1970. Agricultural and urban runoff is also incredibly bad for coral reefs, but all of its inhabitants as well. Even though organic and inorganic liquids are okay for land-based life, it can be completely devastating to marine life. It is estimated that 10% of coral reefs are gone because of human activity alone. There are also more destructive forces that we can't really avoid, such as the El Nino incident of 1988 and 1989. This caused a lot of damage to the world's coral reefs, and also storms large waves can cause a huge amount of damage to coral reefs by throwing objects into them. So why should we protect coral reefs? Obviously, the biggest reason is to try and protect the coral reefs and the thousands of species that call it home. They're like bustling cities, and without these reefs, we wouldn't have the species anywhere in the ocean because all of the ocean relies on these coral reefs. On a more human-friendly side of coral reefs, they very simply protect the beaches. Reefs provide a natural barrier against waves and tidal waves and storm waves. Uh, in, nine, in 2004, the Maldives took out a lot of the coral reefs to make room for ships and harbors to get into dock. And yet they spent over $10 million creating a wall to help protect the beaches from the waves that the coral reefs have been doing for a long, long time. It is estimated that these coral reefs also bring in about $375 billion every year in tourism all around the world. So we do owe a large gross income to tourism and their beautiful reefs. Recently, medical science has found that treatments that can only be found in coral reefs can cure diseases such as cardiovascular disease, leukemia, skin cancer, and other terrible diseases. More than half of new cancer research is made on marine mammals and animals found only in coral reefs. On top of cures for diseases, the internal structure of coral can make huge improvements to bone grafting materials. So what can I do? That's a very good question. There are many things that any old Joe can do, from just by reducing their carbon footprint on the earth, and that is one of the biggest parts that you can help. Coral reefs have been reduced because of global warming, and by reducing your carbon footprint, you're creating less waste, you're using less power, and you're helping with reducing your carbon emission. Driving hybrid cars, walking, or using a bike to get to close places instead of a car, or even switching to LED light bulbs can help reduce the carbon dioxide pollution that energy creates by burning fossil fuels. Water conservation is another huge way to help. So much water is wasted while brushing teeth, taking a shower, or even washing dishes. And on top of that, people use way too much soap than they should. Using less soap or biodegradable soap that is environmental friendly is a good way to start, and maybe cut back a little bit on the shower time. When planning your dinner, try and stay away from fish that isn't overfished, such as bluefin tuna, snapper, or grouper. Even though some of the overfished seafood may be from open waters, this does affect the coral reefs. And lastly, I know that we cannot be all fortunate enough to live near a coral reef or even a beach, So next time you plan a vacation, why not volunteer for a coral reef cleanup? Many people have started doing this as a way of not only keeping the coral reef clean of pollution and trash, but also a great way of enjoying the coral reef ecosystems. If you do choose to do this, please remember to practice safe and responsible diving. The anchors from boats and stepping on or even touching can sometimes cause more harm than good when you're out cleaning the reefs. There are hundreds of species of coral in the world, and these reefs depend on us just as much as we depend on them. Simple acts and changes to your daily routine can greatly improve the life of these delicate underwater rainforests and keep the oceans alive and colorful. But most coral takes about a year to only grow about 1 centimeter, but can be completely lost in just 1 year. So for reefs like the Great Barrier Reef, it's just young at 500,000 years, and it is still growing. And with your help and the help of everybody else in the tiniest bit can go the longest way for the Great Barrier Reef and many others. Thank you for listening.